Real quick before we begin, if you enjoy this video and the others on this channel, subscribing, liking, and commenting go a really long way. I'd love to build up our community here and on Twitch. Ty the Tasmanian Tiger 2 Bush Rescue was developed by Krome Studios and originally released in 2004 for the GameCube, PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Game Boy Advance. It was the follow-up to 2002's original Ty game, and much like that one, Bush Rescue received a pretty cool HD remaster from its original studio, released in late 2017. As a matter of disclosure of nostalgia, Ty 2 Bush Rescue has a remarkably special place in my heart, and has since the first time I played it. I talked briefly about how I was introduced to the Ty games in the review of the first game, but without a doubt, Ty 2 was the one I played the most. When I was a kid, I was allowed to spend 1 hour a day max playing video games, assuming I'd done everything I was supposed to. As such, that time became extraordinarily precious. So when I say I played through Ty 2 over and over and over, that should show how much I adored it. While in part I was just at the right age, I also think Ty 2 had a shockingly large effect on my perception of games and what they could be. But does the game hold up? While it is a faithful remaster, it does stumble in a few places. So let's get into it. First and foremost, while on PC Ty 2 HD does support mouse and keyboard, it plays far better on a controller. It's about as close to the fine line of necessity as possible, and I wholeheartedly recommend on playing with the controller. The core gameplay is familiar and somewhat basic, but that's by no means a bad thing. If you've played a 3D platformer before, there's a good chance you'll pick up Ty's basic moveset pretty easily. Movement consists of running, jumping, and gliding, while combat is as simple as a bite and a throw, though of course all of these actions can be enhanced or altered by combining them in different ways. Beyond that, there are contextual actions like grinding on rails, climbing up a ledge you just barely missed, and chaining bites together to travel a short distance. It's all a simple but elegant system, and it all works fine, save for some weirdness with swimming. While by no means a massive issue, moving through the water as Ty feels stiff and weird. Otherwise, all of the platforming and movement feels responsive and tight, and there wasn't really a single point playing as Ty where I felt like I had to fight against the controls. In addition to his basic moveset, Ty's gameplay is greatly enhanced by the array of different boomerangs you acquire throughout the game. Unlike the first game, these unlocks are not linear, replaced by 2 shops where you can buy boomerangs in whatever order you'd like. With the game's open world-esque mission structure, more on that later, it just offers a great deal of personal freedom to play what you want, how you want. Completing every mission in the game is not mandatory, and very few missions actually require you to have a certain kind of boomerang. Instead, they're meant to open up combat and exploration options to the player. They're not needed to progress, but boomerangs are critical to finding tucked away secrets and collectibles. These range from fire to burn away webs, to ones that allow you to see otherwise invisible boxes. That's to say nothing of the boomerangs that cause giant explosions, shattering even rocks on your way. The level design in Ty 2 focuses around smaller areas that you access from points around the map of Southern Rivers. These smaller areas tend to have 1 or 2 objectives therein. All of these are self-contained, and only a couple are larger or longer levels closer to the scale of Ty 1. While this quote-unquote dungeon style of areas is neat, and traveling drags out the game's length, I still think I preferred the bigger, explorable levels of the first Ty game. These smaller maps lack a real sense of scale or exploration. Of course, then there's Ty 2's biggest risk, and in my opinion, weakest area: vehicle sections. There are a number of different vehicles throughout the game, mostly mechs called bunyips, after the Australian mythical creature of the same name. The largest vehicle section is the navigation of the open world of Southern Rivers, where Ty is locked in place to the back of a 4B until stopping at specified locations to enter a level area. The driving is really nothing remarkable, and the car controls reasonably well. One change from the original version is getting rid of mud as a major inhibiting factor. In the original console version, it would both slow the car and alter steering, but for the remake they made it far less annoying. Beyond the car, we have the helicopter and submarine, which function basically identically to each other. They're drawn out, almost top-down third-person sections with a floaty camera, and the missions normally involve picking things up and carrying them elsewhere, while avoiding hazards. They're fairly dull and simple, but luckily only tend to take like 5 minutes max. Beyond that, we then have different bunyips: the Battle, Lifter, and Thermo Extreme bunyips. The Battle bunyip is the most straightforward and is similar to Ty's basic movement, but focuses on punching and combat with larger enemies. The Lifter is by far the most egregious, though luckily it's barely utilized in the game. It moves very slowly on its own, and one of the core themes of these sections with it is lifting, which only slows you down more. The Thermo Extreme bunyip is a mixed bag, and is easily the most conceptually interesting of the group. It's a medium-speed amphibious mech capable of swimming in lava, shooting freezing coolant, and punching. Unfortunately though, it relies on the subpar swimming controls, and the levels for it are just not complementary most of the time. It has a lot of potential, but only really acts on that 1 or 2 times. I kind of wish that instead of 2 or 3 missions in each different bunyip, Krome had instead focused on the refining and ongoing progression of just one type of mech. Of course, I'd also be remiss if I didn't mention the kart racing quickly. It's kart racing. Yeah, it's pretty generic and is more of a distraction than any sort of standout game mode. Ty 2 took a lot of risks, which I can respect, but unfortunately the game suffers a little with the bold changes. The smaller level design feels restricted compared to the original, and far too many of the vehicle sections are just underbaked. At the core though, the Ty gameplay is still solid though, through and through. Bush Rescue knows exactly what it is and doesn't try to pretend to be anything else. It's by no means a complex or deep narrative, but that wasn't really what they were going for, and it instead revels in its camp and corny sense of humor. While Ty 1 was a fairly straightforward story, it lacked a lot of actual recurring characters. With the sequel actually taking the events of the first game into account and setting the game some years later, it gives a great excuse to show a more populated world now that all the mammals are back. Burramudgee Town is lively and honestly a lovely little setting, and I can't help but linger every time I start up the game. Though none of the characters are complex per se, we do get colorful little portraits of the ones we meet. The witty and charming Shazza, the edgy cool guy Sly, the gruff do-gooder Ranger Ken, and the upbeat flightless pilot Duke, and more. Again, narratively, the game is pretty straightforward. Ty and his friends form a group called Bush Rescue with the aim of helping out around southern rivers while doing dangerous jobs. The treacherous boss Cass from the first game has been broken out of jail, and it's up to Ty to stop his nefarious plans while also juggling the needs of the citizens of the area. One area of the story that really stands out is the weirdly dark plotline of Cass draining the life out of small fuzzy animals to give his lizard minions power. It always weirded me out as a kid, and even now it feels vaguely too evil for a game aimed at younger audiences. It's by no means graphic, just slightly jarring compared to the rest of this colorful, cartoony world. Beyond the main narrative, the individual quest dialogue is well constructed enough for the corny and pretty goofy tone the game aims for. There's a lot of dumb jokes and wacky dialogue, often leading Ty to act as the straight man in the comedy. Again, it's all by no means award-winning, but for the fun, lighthearted adventure tone it's going for, it all fits together nicely. For sound, Ty 2 is generally pretty good, but to start off, let's talk soundtrack. George Stamatiadis, the composer from Ty 1, returns for Bush Rescue, with a much larger task at hand. Impressively though, the soundtrack is to scale with the rest of the experience, offering fitting and unique pieces to mesh with the varied environments and mission types. There's a lot of twangy guitar with some electric guitar or synth pieces mixed in during more intense moments, while orchestral music is saved for big dramatic moments. By far my favorite piece in the game is Burramudgee Town, which plays in the area by the same name, an area you pass through a great deal, especially if you're stopping and starting a lot. It's chill as heck on its own, and the nostalgia is like a kick in the chest. The soundtrack is a little cartoony at times, but it feels fitting for the rest of the game's presentation. I said it before with Ty 1, but the bite sound effect is a nightmare to me. Clashing teeth is a bad sound, and you'll never convince me otherwise. Aside from that though, the rest of the sound effects are well done enough. Boomerangs have a consistently distinct whooshing sound as they fly through the air, the mech sounds gives them a satisfying weight, and the sound of the 4B's tires struggling out of mud is immediately identifiable. The voice acting is just as much fun as in Taiwan, with a whole lot more of it thanks to the new structure. Everyone's performances radiate pure fun, whether they're returning or new characters. As with Taiwan though, Greg Ellis as Tai and Clement von Frankenstein as Boss Cass steal the show with their performances. But even with that said, they're among other wonderful performances. Darren Jennings as Dennis, Peta Johnson as Shaza, William Snow as Sly, and Kim Wilson as Fluffy. Really, my only gripe with any of the voice acting is that a few characters' actual recording, the capture itself, not their performance, sounds a little funky or off. With sound, most often it takes something being wrong for most people to take note. Tai 2's sound design is competent, if straightforward, without any real flair or bells and whistles, but its fitting score and wonderfully fun voice performances carry it. Before we get into the HD remaster portion, I want to mention something I've already brought up briefly during the gameplay section, where I talked about the shift to smaller levels, which lead to more varied environments. This is obviously reflected visually, and the variety is honestly pretty nice. From the rocky desert, to the beautiful sun-soaked beach, to a near prehistoric looking rainforest, Tai 2 keeps introducing visually fresh but cohesive sights. Heck, there's even a spooky haunted mansion on the hill over Burumuji, which I love. As for overall graphical quality, Tai 2 HD has received the same treatment as the first game. Like any remaster as opposed to a remake, it obviously still shows its age, but Tai 2 is a successful remaster that carries its age with grace and a fresh coat of paint. Fortunately, the game's art direction favors vibrant, distinct colors, which do a lot to help the game's cartoonish aesthetic hold up even after all this time. This is especially relevant with environments and helps the world feel a lot larger. Bouncing between open outback, luscious rainforests, industrial oil rigs, the coral reef, and more, there's immediate visual clarity as color palettes swap drastically. The characters in Tai 2 though are a double-edged sword, a strength and a weakness. The character design in the games is really fun, but their appearance is also where the game shows its age the most. The textures are fine, but the models are clunky and polygonal and feel like the weakest link visually. Additionally, the remaster introduces a cosmetic skin system that allows the player to switch between a few different looks for Tai himself and the 4B. But speaking of cosmetics, that leads us into our first venture into a new, 5th category, monetization. Here's a quick rundown of the category. This section breaks down how the game presents itself for sale, as well as any downloadable content or microtransactions. This section holds no score, but the contents of the section themselves are a clear judgment. Fortunately, modern monetization hasn't taken hold with the Tai remasters. While the game does have cosmetics and skins, they can only be bought with items found in-game, and the game has no microtransactions. The game and all of its contents are bought as one item, and the only DLC it has is a copy of the game's soundtrack. This should be the baseline for remasters in most games, but unfortunately that's not the case. Tai 2 HD's monetization is straightforward, uncomplicated, and consumer-friendly. Tai 2 goes for a number of ambitious changes, but ultimately they don't really pay off. Tai 1's HD remaster is far easier to recommend, but Tai 2 is by no means a bad game, and this remaster is the definitive way to experience a classic collectathon platformer that I'd also recommend if you really enjoyed the first game. Hey, thanks for watching this! Dropping a like or subscribing is really cool and shows me that people are enjoying my work. If you like this or my other content, tell your friends. Now let's just see how long it takes for me to finish the review for Tai 3, which if you haven't played, is wild. It's the series' dark, edgy sibling, and I'm all here for it. For now though, take care of your bones.